So hello everyone. My name is Ray Matthews. I'm a member of New Life, and we are here recording live to talk about the story of Amnon and Tamar. You may have heard this story before. However, I'm going to try to dive in a little bit deeper into exactly what happened and really how this affects you, how this affects the family, and how this affects us spiritually. So let's get into it. There are a couple of things to note in the story, and without digging too much into the weeds, I do want to point out that this incident occurs after David's scandal with Bathsheba. And in 2 Samuel chapter 12, we're going to go back a little bit. We will see where Nathan the prophet comes to David and reveals his sin to him. And not only that, in 2 Samuel 12 and 10, he goes to say, it says, "Now therefore the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own." So the question here is, why are we still dealing with sexual sin even after David's sin with Bathsheba? David initially was not really repentant until after Nathan had came to him and said, "Hey, this is what you've done." What we will find even through history, even in our own families, is that when we don't deal with something, it tends to have a cyclical approach. So it happens over and over and over again until that sin is dealt with. It's also good to note that what you do in secret, this is just a personal note, what you do in secret will always be revealed somewhere down the line, whether it's in your generation, someone else's generation, it's just always going to be revealed. I think one of the most prevalent sins that we have in our household, not just in the Bible, but it is our sexual sin and how that creates domino effects. In this case, we're going to see how Amnon's heart was much similar to David's heart. And in addition to that, how his decisions affects him and his family later on, much like what was projected in 2 Samuel chapter 12. So the story is taken from 2 Samuel chapter 13, and we're going to start by reading the first verse. "In the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David." Verse 2. "Amnon became frustrated to the point of illness on account of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Now Amnon had a friend named Jonadab, son of Shimea. David's brother Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Amnon, 'Why do you, the king's son, look so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me?' Amnon said to him, 'I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister.' 'Go to bed and pretend to be ill,' Jonadab said. 'When your father comes in or comes to see you, say to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come in and give me something to eat. Let me prepare the food in my sight, or let her prepare the food in my sight, so I may watch her and then eat it from her hand.' So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, 'I would like my sister Tamar to come and make me some special bread in my sight, so I may eat from her hand.' David sent word to Tamar at the palace, 'Go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him.' So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, made the bread in his sight, and baked it. Then she took the pan and served him the bread, but he refused to eat. 'Send everyone out of here,' Amnon said. So everyone left him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, 'Bring the food here into my bedroom, so I may eat from your hand.' And Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed it from her and said, 'Come to bed with me, my sister.' 'Don't, my brother,' she said to him. 'Don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel.' Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you. But he refused to listen to her. And since he was stronger than she, he raped her. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Amnon said to her, "Get up and get out." "No," she said to him, "sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you already have done." But he refused to listen to her. He called his personal servant and said, "Get this woman out of here and bolt the door after her." So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She was wearing a richly ornamented robe, for this was the kind of garment the virgin daughters of the king wore. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the ornamented robe she was wearing. She put her hand on her head and went away, weeping aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Was that Amnon your brother? Has he been with you?" "Be quiet now, my sister. He is your brother. Don't take this thing to heart." And Tamar lived in her brother's home, a desolate woman. When King David heard all this, he was furious. Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister Tamar. I want to bring something to your attention. So it says Amnon became frustrated to the point of illness on the account of his sister Tamar. So in the Bible, in some commentaries, it states that this type of illness is like he is sick and frustrated. Not only because he wants his sister, but also he has to devise a plan to have her for himself. Historically speaking, biblical times, the children live with their mothers. So Amnon and Tamar had different mothers. So they lived in different houses. And in another commentary, another translation, it also says that Tamar was kept from men. So he had to devise a plan with Jonadab to allow this thing to take place because there was just no other way. And we'll find out that this desire that he has for Tamar is not love. It is actually lust. This is how we'll know. So it says, "And for she was a virgin and seemed impossible for him to do anything with her." Now, Amnon had a friend named Jonadab. This is where you should just really be careful of your acquaintances, okay? Because sometimes people can give you the most terrible advice. And sometimes because we live in a life of now and what we want now, we don't really see the future effects of our decisions today. So be careful of your acquaintances, especially because sometimes you do have someone who's giving you foul advice to do something that is evil in the sight of the Lord. But at the same time, it's harder when we've surrounded ourselves with these people, it's harder to find people to give us wise insight. So in the story here, it says Jonadab basically gave him some counsel and was like, "Hey, if you want to do this, I can help you I can devise a plan for you. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to get her alone. Just make it seem like she's coming over to cook. You're not feeling well. You need her to come over. And in addition to those things, she's going to be the one. This is how we're going to get her alone." Now, I think, truthfully, when we think about this story, I'm always wondering, did Tamar not think that something was up when he told everyone to leave? I think that in one perspective, I believe that she was comfortable with her brother. He had never done anything before. And there was no signs that this was actually going to happen. Although the commentaries and Bible does not disclose what kind of relationship they had, who she was, how much they hung out, or what have you, there has to be some type of trust that we're looking at. There has to be some type of trust that Tamar had with Amnon. Perhaps she felt like he was like Absalom, which was her whole brother. We don't really know. Scrolling down, it says, "So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, 'I would like my sister Tamar to come make some special bread.' David sent the word to Tamar, and Tamar comes over. And not only did she make the bread, but one commentary says she made it into a heart. And I think part of that is Tamar's purity in heart. sometimes I think that the most pure people, and it's always in majority of the time, it's innocent people who are taken advantage of, who don't have the heart to do evil, who are taken advantage of. And then Amnon's son said to Tamar, bring the food here into my bedroom. And so we see this scandal again unraveling, much like we saw with David and Bathsheba, this similar scandal. Let me devise a plan so I can have my selfish lust, so I can do what I want to do. And Tamar took the bread and she had prepared and brought it to the brother Amnon in the bedroom. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, come to bed with me, my sister. And she goes, don't, my brother. Don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. So before we can talk about the rape alone, Tamar begins to bring up the law. So she goes, this should not be done. Number one, we're God's people. Number one, we should be representing the law of God, the law that God gave Moses. So this is something that's just forbidden. We should not be doing this. Well, obviously that wasn't enough because he didn't stop. So then she says, don't do this wicked thing. What about me? So her saying, what about me? Is like, well, what am I going to do? If this happens, what am I going to do with this shame? Nobody's going to want me. I'm going to just like be an outcast now because you have taken my virginity from me and have destroyed my character. Not only my character, but even yours. Like, I'm going to be an embarrassment to my family because my father's probably going to come to me and say, well, why aren't you married? Or why aren't you getting married? Well, obviously here in the scriptures, it says that she was raped by her brother. So now that purity, that being set aside, that feeling of value has now been stripped from her in one single incident. So it says, and what about you? So basically she goes, well, if this is not enough for you to stop, then what about you? What about who you're going to become? What about your character? What about you being prince? What about your future? Again, this is a situation that was made purely off of lust. He had no real desire to marry her, to be with her, to want to, love her as his wife. It was mainly off of what I can get out of the deal and what is going to benefit me. So she says, please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you. But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Amnon said to her, get up and get out. So an important thing to note here is oftentimes when you have people who commit offenses against someone who is innocent, they will always blame the victim for their behavior. This is something to know even in what we do. When we are spiritually immature in Christ, we do not take responsibility for our own behaviors. Instead, we deflect it on someone else because it's much easier to deal with the guilt when we can make someone else feel like they did something to us. One of the most cruelest offenses is to do that. It is to push the blame on someone else. It is to say that it is your fault that I did this and you don't belong here. And I think when we treat God's creatures as if they don't deserve to be loved, that gives us a better approach as to who we are, right? And this is within anybody. This is not just, your sister. This is also your brother, your mom. This is any relationship, any human being. For the sake of being human, we should be able to treat people with respect and dignity that we see opposite in the story of Tamar and Amnon. So I really want to sum up the story. So one of the things that we can note is that, number one, one of the reasons why we can think that David did not deal with his son Amnon was because of his own sin and because of his own character flaws. One of the interesting things about this story is that David could slay giants, but he couldn't slay the giant in his own heart, neither in his son's heart. So even in this text, we will see that how the character of men will not when not cultivated, when not held accountable, becomes issues in our household and within our children. And we cannot carry the guilt and sorrow and pain of what happened previously in our lives. We have to be able to directly deal with the sin, regardless of whether we have done it and have received forgiveness, or if it's someone else. Like, we have to be able to deal with this sin regardless. Like, God doesn't say, oh, well, because you've done this one thing, you can't chastise your children. You can't chastise anyone. You can't speak on it. If anybody should be speaking about a sin, it should be you. If you know the sin actually hits home, if you know that sin is wrong, regardless of what it may feel like. And in this case, the reason why he did not chastise Amnon was because, number one, he was his oldest son. And not only that, but he just didn't feel the need to. But also as a father, I'm always wondering, how can you be that angry with what happened but not address the situation? Taking on a cowardice approach is never the way that God reflects himself in the Bible. God always deals with sin accordingly. We cannot be cowards in public or in private. Additionally, when it comes to character flaws, they start at home. So later on, we'll see where Absalom, the brother of Tamar, begins to take matters into his own hands. Now, the problem is that even in Absalom's taking matters into his own hands, he has Amnon killed, but with Absalom, it still created a cycle of just evil. It still created a cycle that was not fixed. So you cannot fix evil with evil. You have to address it accordingly. And in the Bible, it says that he was supposed to have been cut off from his family. That was what was supposed to happen. As a father, he was supposed, regardless of, let me tell you something. If my son does something crazy and I know it ain't right, I'm not covering up for you. You need to learn from this behavior, regardless of what it may take. Sexual assault is so prevalent in people's families, households, because people will not deal with this sin. They blow it under the rug. And also, I know that when I first started this text, I was asked, was this message going to trigger me? And the more studying that I did, the more I realized that men have a greater place in setting things right in their household than anyone else. They are the head of the household. So it is their job as fathers to make sure that they are aligning with what God says and making sure that their children are doing the same. And when they are not, they're supposed to chastise them, much like God chastised David by bringing evil and calamity into his household. That was a direct reflection of what happened with David and Bathsheba. God was like, hey, well, since you're not gonna fix it, I'm going to show you exactly what I'm going to do to fix the issue for you. So I hope that you were able to learn something from today. I think that when it comes to biblical stories, especially in Old Testament, there's something that we can learn from all of them. One of the things that I would like to just bring to fruition is, no matter who it is, you're supposed to stand up for righteousness sake. It's the biblical principle, it's a biblical law to stand up for what is right, no matter whether it's your supervisor, no matter it's your family friend, no matter who it is to stand up for what's right, and also to play a redemptive part in the case of women who have been taken advantage of. And a lot of times issues aren't resolved in our own household because we're afraid of dealing with the giants. So hope that this finds you well.